think one of the jump scares in Twilight Princess occurs around Snow Peak, where like the character's looking at the mirror and they turn around and scream at you and stuff like that.
Yeah, is Zelda so frightening because you're not expecting it to be frightening?
Because it's a Nintendo game.
It's so amazing to me that even at that time, on lesser hardware, just to see how far they were pushing the boundaries of that franchise and how quickly they established that, yeah, this franchise is always going to try something new. We're always going to test our limits. We're never going to rest on our laurels. It's just one of my favorite things they've ever done.
Hey, and welcome to Power Up, presented by Razer. I'm Sam Stone, and we're gonna go all in on one of our favorite video game franchises, The Legend of Zelda. We're gonna share our thoughts about The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom, and we're gonna compare notes on our favorite moments from the entire series. So sit back, plug in, and power up. The Philips CDI notwithstanding, it's bananas that it's taken this long to get a Zelda game where you actually get to play as Princess Zelda. But it's finally here, The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom for the Nintendo Switch. Here's our thoughts about the new game.
The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom is an excellent mix of the old and new. The Nintendo Switch launched with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild in 2017, and 7 years later, it's ending its life cycle with Echoes of Wisdom. Presented in a similar animation style and isometric perspective as the 2019 remake of Link's Awakening, Echoes of Wisdom achieves a milestone in Nintendo's long-running fantasy franchise by actually making Princess Zelda the protagonist. And while giving Zelda the spotlight in a mainline Zelda game is a huge step for the series, there is much more going on within Echoes of Wisdom than a simple protagonist swap. Echoes of Wisdom takes place in a classic version of Hyrule that resembles the character designs and architecture of the 1991's The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The game begins with Link infiltrating Ganon's lair to defeat him and rescue Princess Zelda. However, the fight is interrupted when an extra-dimensional rift to the Still World suddenly opens, swallowing up Link and Ganon. Fortunately, Link manages to free Zelda before he is trapped in the alternate dimension. Zelda flees from Ganon's castle before it is consumed by the Still World, led by a mysterious sprite named Tri, only to find that Still World rifts are opening up all over Hyrule and unleashing terrifying monsters. After her father is taken into the Still World and his shadowy doppelganger declares Zelda an enemy of the kingdom, Zelda and Tri go on a quest to close the rifts and rescue those trapped inside. Tri arms Zelda with the Tri-Rod, which allows her to create echoes of objects she encounters. Zelda must learn how to echo objects and monsters to progress in the game. There are certain objects in the game that Zelda can also have Tri temporarily bond with, either to mirror Zelda's movements or defy the laws of physics. This makes for a much more puzzle-centric Zelda game than ever before, especially when it comes to the dungeons. Of course, Zelda games have always had a strong element of puzzle solving to them, but it's more pronounced here, and the game doesn't readily hand out clues on how to progress. In other words, put on your thinking caps for this installment. This core mechanic also heavily informs the combat gameplay in Echoes of Wisdom. Zelda doesn't have an active role in the fighting, at least not initially. Zelda often has to summon echoes of monsters to do the fighting for her. Zelda fans may be used to slashing out of trouble with the Master Sword, but Echoes of Wisdom positions Zelda more as a tactician and leader than as a warrior, which takes some getting used to, but it's a neat twist that adds a bit more strategy to the mix. While Echoes of Wisdom brings changes to the gameplay and focus of the series, it also features plenty of callbacks to past games. Link's opening confrontation with Ganon is presented similarly to the climax of Ocarina of Time. From Zelda being suspended in a magical crystal over the combatants, to Link resorting to reflecting Ganon's energy blasts back at him to momentarily stun him. Ocarina of Time inspired designs of the Gerudo, Deku Scrubs, Zora, and Gorons also appear in Echoes of Wisdom, as do the Yeti from The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Even the narrative premise of Zelda fitting between Hyrule and the Still World feels like alternating between Hyrule and the Dark World in A Link to the Past, or the Twilight Realm in Twilight Princess. All this recognizable window dressing creates a welcoming environment, while Echoes of Wisdom quietly changes the franchise's usual gameplay mechanics. The Tri-Rod and its magical capabilities also feel like they're a natural extension of the Sheikah Slate and Zonai artifacts from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, respectively. Though it's not one-to-one in terms of functionality, the idea of using a device to create and move items to solve puzzles was a hallmark in those games, especially Tears of the Kingdom. Echoes of Wisdom feels like a bridge between the current generation of Zelda games on the Switch and the isometric classics that made the franchise such an enduring Nintendo property in the first place. And Echoes of Wisdom does it all, while continuing to take the series into new and exciting areas. And frankly, Princess Zelda herself is the perfect person in the storied series to usher in this new era. The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is available now for the Nintendo Switch. Power score, 5 out of 5. And now, a message from the sponsor of this episode, Razer.
I love my gaming PC. I've had it for years. I used it to play Valorant, Cyberpunk, The Witcher, but I have to admit, my PC is starting to get a little long in the tooth. I've had it for a while, and normally I would consider upgrading it. Upgrades can cost hundreds, even thousands of dollars. It's work in terms of taking things apart and putting them back together. But I know there's plenty of life in this old baby, and that's where Razer Cortex comes in. What if I told you there was a way to upgrade your PC for free? The cool thing about Cortex, it can breathe new life into your old gaming PC, optimize performance, so you don't have to necessarily get that new graphics card or spend all that time trying to figure out how to get this thing to work. Cortex does all the heavy lifting for you. How does Razer Cortex work? Well, without it, you'd have to manually identify and clean all those large and old files that are affecting your system performance. That's where Razer Cortex comes in. Its System Booster feature automatically identifies and cleans that for you. So why don't you let Cortex do all the hard work and heavy lifting in terms of removing all the dust and rust from your PC that keeps it being from all it can be. What else can System Booster do for you? All that visual clutter and background programs that affect your PC's performance, including some of the stuff that Windows does that you might not know about, System Booster can identify it and can automatically shut a lot of that stuff down. You can customize how much you scale up and scale down your PC's performance, and of course toggle as you wish. The power is yours. Razer Cortex also has the Game Booster feature. All those background programs you might be running as you launch a game, web browsers, other junk that you might have going on, Game Booster automatically shuts all that down and prioritizes the performance of your game. Frame rates increase, textures get better. You'd be amazed how much your game improves with Game Booster. Look, if you need a new PC or a physical upgrade, then you need a new PC or a physical upgrade. But you'd be amazed how many PCs can be significantly improved through Razer Cortex. Just because a house is dirty doesn't mean you need to buy a new house. So check out Razer Cortex for free and put the power back in your PC. One of video games' most enduring and celebrated franchises is The Legend of Zelda. For over 30 years, it's been a Nintendo mainstay, starting out on the Nintendo Entertainment System and continuing on to the Nintendo Switch and beyond. Here I am with Den of Geek games editor Matthew Byrd, all to talk about our mutual love of Zelda, our favorite games, our favorite moments. Matt, thanks for coming on the show today.
Sam, thanks for having me. I've loved Legend of Zelda ever since I was a kid, and somehow, 30 plus years later, I think I love it more than ever.
Zelda taught me how rich and emotional storytelling could be in the video game medium. That's something that's only grown over time. There's just so much to go over. Let's dive right into it.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the most epic things about The Legend of Zelda, of course, is the boss battles. There's so many of them in each game. They're so memorable. A lot of them stand out for me. What are some of your favorite boss fights in the Legend of Zelda series?
You know, as weird as it sounds, my favorite boss fight in The Legend of Zelda is from one of my least favorite Legend of Zelda games. It's Koloktos from Skyward Sword, which, so my favorite Zelda boss fights, most of them, they always revolve around some item you typically require that's incorporated in the boss fight in a cool way. It's a hallmark of the series, and I love the way you use the whip in this fight to just chip away at Koloktos like means of attack and eventually slowly unlock all these other phases of the fight. There's a puzzle-like quality to it, but it all feeds into what Skyward Sword did best when it was at its best, and that's really enhanced that Legend of Zelda combat. It's just a viscerally satisfying fight.
For me, I always love the final battles. There's a sense of epic scale to them. They feel like an emotional payoff to this entire game you've been playing through all along. And, because it's Zelda, it's usually Ganon or Ganondorf or whatever we're calling him title to title. It could be Ganon in Link to the Past. It could be Ganon in Ocarina of Time. It could be that awesome duel at the end of Wind Waker. Ganon is so memorable. He even has a cameo as one of the bosses in the boss rush at the end of Link's Awakening. But my favorite is probably, if I had to call it, it probably is Ganon in Ocarina of Time, just because you've got Koji Kondo's soaring music, you lose the Master Sword for the first half of the fight. It just feels like a really big, epic moment. But then you have the Bigoron sword, and you just lay waste to him immediately.
Yeah, it kind of set the standard in a lot of ways in terms of presentation. You can even see that with the Galactus battle, where it's this multi-stage, epic, music-changing, incredible visuals. But yeah, I always go back to the Ganondorf Ganon encounter, not just for the Legend of Zelda, but it really feels like for gaming as a whole, where it's okay, here's how you do this cinematic final encounter. This is entirely based off hands-off, actions, but it just feels so epic.
Hit him with a light arrows. Everything is just everything feels earned. It really does feel the culmination of it. What did you think of the Ganon fight at the end of Breath of the Wild?
I love the Ganon fight at the end of Breath of the Wild, but I think for me, the Breath of the Wild fight really comes down to the fact that if you wanted to, theoretically, you could walk straight up to Ganon at the start of the game and have him smack you around a little bit. Some people can get away with it. It wasn't quite that good. But I just love the idea of the way that game made Ganon feel like a presence in the world and not this thing that's eventually just unlocked once you hit a certain point. That was my favorite part of that iteration of the character. So overall, is the Ocarina of Time Ganon your favorite iteration of the villain?
I think so, if you combine it with the Ganondorf fight before the fall of his castle. Because then you've got two very distinct phases. Because you've gone to associate Ganondorf, this humanoid figure, and then you get the payoff at the end that he mutates into his NES, pig demon form thing. And that feels, with the Ganondorf fight, it's more magical. He's throwing spells at you and you're reflecting them back. Whereas the Ganon fight, it's just low, down, dirty. You're fighting in the ruins of his castle and you're just going at it.
And it turns out that was his final form.
Yes.
So boss fights, yes, big part of Legend of Zelda. But until recently, one of the biggest things I associate with Legend of Zelda was the dungeons.
Yeah.
It's a hallmark of most of the series until very recently. And even then, we see some variations on that concept. But what is your favorite dungeon in the history of Legend of Zelda?
That's a good one. I feel like I'm almost with Ocarina of Time. I really like horror games, and Shadow Temple and Ocarina of Time is as horrific as it gets.
Yeah, Ocarina again. That's interesting.
Yeah. You've got all these you find out that Hyrule has this long bloody history as you go deeper into the Shadow Temple. There's ghosts. There's a river of the dead. It's just there's invisible severed hands that try to bring you back to the wall masters that try to bring you back to the start of the stage. It's just a very creepy level. If I had to go a little more classic, I really like Turtle Rock, which is the final one of the final dungeons in Link's Awakening. That's a really cool one. I would say it's my favorite of the classic isometric Zelda games.
Yeah. Which I love those games. Obviously, the dungeons got more elaborate as we entered the more modern era.
Yeah. There's some of the dungeons and stuff in Wind Waker I thought were really cool too. To go back to your point about Ocarina, I agree with you where it is a lot of the horror. I think a lot of people maybe don't admit to this now, but when I played Ocarina, I was terrified. It's a terrifying game, especially, the movement to 3D, and then all of a sudden these things you only ever saw sprites of, and you see them come to 3D full life, and all of a sudden they're just jumping on you, falling from the ceiling. They're madmen over there. They really are. They terrified a generation. I don't think they understood that that's what they did. There's two moments in Ocarina of Time where I had to put down, and I didn't play Zelda for a week.
Do you remember what they were?
I do, 100%, because they're seared and traumatized into my memory. The first one, and it's so innocuous looking back, when you enter Kakariko Village at night, as a kid, the carpenter's son is sitting under the tree, and as you approach, he just looks up and looks straight at you.
Yeah. And I remember that's that little,
that pale guy, and I was just I think I'm good.
It's always the little things, right? It's never the big scares that get you. It's always those little moments that are just burned into your brain for no reason.
The second one is a big scare. In the Forest Temple, you fight a wall master, and it's one of the fights where they don't take you to the beginning of the stage. He's out there to kill you. And when you kill the wall master in these fights, they split into the three smaller ones, and they they grab you and basically strangle you to death. Yeah. And that happened to me, and I was like, I'm not ready for this. And I like jumped ahead to like the forest temple or the fire temple and just played that throughout. So yeah, those are the moments where I was kind of that trauma. What's the scariest Zelda moment for you?
Oh, it's a wall master. I got to tell you the truth. I still get bit by the wall master sometimes, right? I mean, it's like honestly, in Elden Ring, you have the crawling hands that basically operate in the same way. But Nintendo figured this out decades ago in a game probably meant for kids. And again, thank you so much for traumatizing a generation.
Yeah.
I did not need that sleep in any of those nights anyway. So big shout out to Miyamoto and the Zelda team for that one.
Your favorite dungeon?
My favorite dungeon. Well, my favorite dungeon is Snow Peak Ruins in Twilight Princess, which I think is, look, there's a lot of great Zelda dungeons that tell a story. What I love about Snow Peak Ruins, you're not entirely sure what story it is telling. You get little glimpses of what this place is, what happened here, how it fits in the world. But there's a lot of ambiguity as to like why this place, it's almost like a fortress or a mansion from like our world or a different world that seems like it was just dropped into this other time in this other place. And as you go through it, you unlock the story about its current inhabitants, how they got there. But the actual history of the dungeon's kind of shrouded in mystery. And, you know, as you said, I do love like the horror elements of The Legend of Zelda. There is kind of a haunted house vibe to it, but there's also this like beautiful tragedy. There's all these hints at what might have happened here in the statues and the paintings. And the fact it really lets you piece that all together without offering any answers, I really think it exemplifies what the Zelda can do with its storytelling when it's really at its best.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I love about Snow Peak is you're not 100% sure it's a dungeon until you like find the map and compass.
Yeah,
and then you're like, oh, I guess we're in this. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you know, it just draws you in. I think one of the jump scares in Twilight Princess occurs around Snow Peak, where it, like the character's looking at the mirror and they turn around and scream at you and stuff like that.
Yeah, is Zelda so frightening because you're not expecting it to be frightening?
Because it's a Nintendo
right.
game.
You're not there. You're not bracing. I mean, we should at this point. We should know better, but you're just not bracing yourself in the same way you would with all those other franchise businesses. But yes, absolutely.
I mean, there's some of the scariest stuff is in like Wind Waker, which is ostensibly like one of the more like childishly or all age friendly presented. You know, there's a ghost ship that's like going on the way in the Great Sea in Wind Waker. There's the Redead design in Wind Waker is terrifying.
Well, you know, a lot of dungeons, you're ultimately just trying to get through them, right? Wind Waker, or sorry, Water Temple in Ocarina of Time, a perfect example. What I love about Snow Peak Ruins is I didn't want to leave that dungeon. I just kept wanting to explore it. And I really think that's how the best Zelda dungeons should make you feel.
And I feel the same way about the Shadow
Absolutely.
Temple. Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
But massive franchise, everyone has a favorites, everyone has some least favorites, but I feel like there are weirdly a lot of games somewhere in the middle that kind of get left out of the conversation sometimes. What is your most underrated Zelda game?
For me, it's probably like Link's Awakening, just because I think a lot of people kind of brushed aside over it because they were playing Link to the Past and then Ocarina of Time. It falls in between those two games. There's been so much reappraisal of Majora's Mask at this point, and rightfully so, where it's like, okay, yeah, you're well rated at this point. I don't think that's happened for Link's Awakening yet. I mean, there was that great remake on the Switch.
There was, yeah.
But I think people still sleep on that one as like one of the great. I mean, there's an entire Capcom era of Zelda games that get slept on, but for me, it's probably Link's Awakening.
Well, I agree with you. There was a remake. I don't know if we really appreciate that remake as much as we should, to be honest with you. But I even feel like if you want to push that aside, I don't think the original Game Boy version gets enough love. You know, the remake is mostly faithful, but I think the Game Boy version on its own, when you played that, it is such an incredible experience. And it's so amazing to me that even at that time, on lesser hardware, just to see how far they were pushing the boundaries of that franchise and how quickly they established that, yeah, this franchise is always going to try something new. We're always going to test our limits. We're never going to rest on our laurels. The storytelling, the ending of that game alone, speaking of storytelling in Legend of Zelda, it's just one of my favorite things they've ever done.
It's almost Lynchian in how surreal it is.
Well, it was inspired by Twin Peaks, allegedly. Parts of it, yes, that idea of being locked in this kind of village with its own identity and there being this like dreamlike, maybe literal in that instance, but a kind of dreamlike vibe around the entire place. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by that Zelda Twin Peaks connection.
Yeah, I mean, I'm such an old head that I've been playing Link's Awakening before it got, remastered for the Game Boy Color.
Yeah.
Like it was my, maybe this is like nostalgia bias, but when I got a Game Boy, that was the pack-in title.
Oh, really?
that came with it. So,
man, what a deal. Oh my God. Could you imagine?
I can because I had it.
No, could you imagine if they were gutsy enough to do that now, right? Where it's like now pretty much everyone who owned a Switch got Breath of the Wild anyway,
Yeah.
but if they were like, hey, here's Breath of the Wild, go nuts, kids. Different era.
Definitely. What about you? What's the most underrated Zelda game?
Well, you mentioned the Capcom titles. Mine is Minish Cap. And I actually didn't know Minish Cap was underrated until very recently when I really looked at how many units it sold or didn't sell. And honestly, how well the Game Boy Advance itself didn't perform. I really thought it did better than it ultimately did. Minish Cap of those Capcom games, one of the things Capcom's always been good at is they really always kind of go back to kind of an arcade-ish, I don't want to use the word arcade necessarily, but just that pure fun arcade roots. In Minish Cap, it's very short, 8 hours, maybe generous depending on how experienced you are. But just one of the most compact examples of a Legend of Zelda game I can imagine. And even in some of the Legend of Zelda games I love, they can wear you down after a while. You can pop in Minish Cap at any time. It's just the perfect encapsulation of pretty much everything I love about this series. Visually creative, incredible dungeons, amazing boss fights, fantastic world, whole thing looks great, and I love the ability to shrink down to miniature size and explore that world from a new perspective. It's one of my favorite mechanics in the history of the franchise.
Yeah. For me, there's something just funny about having a bird hat.
That's all you need, right? Yeah. Listen, we all love the new Zelda games, but if they're missing anything, and they are missing something, it's a bird hat.
We need bird hats. I need to upgrade to a bird hat.
And not just a cosmetic either. This isn't Fortnite. I need that bird hat to go to work for me.
Yeah. Give me the bird hat.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're dancing around, of course, the biggest question of them all.
Ooh.
What is your favorite Zelda game, just period, of all time?
I'm going to put you on the hot spot. You're going to have to go first on this one.
Well, I've invoked Ocarina of Time multiple times. I will say it's the game that made me, I was alluding earlier how it's a franchise that made me realize how rich and emotional storytelling in video games can be. And that really, as all due respect to Link to the Past, which has an awesome opening, it's just an awesome game overall. But it's Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time, yeah. I mean, what's ever going to beat that first moment you ride across Hyrule Field? In the early before we got to what we now know as sandbox open world or whatever, I mean, that felt like it. That was the most freedom I had ever experienced in a video game up until that point.
That was a game where I would play it just to explore, and that's a game I can beat in less than a day now, just because I have it ingrained in my memory so much. But even as a kid, I would just play it just to explore and just kind of live in that world.
Well, growing up, I had the PlayStation. My neighbor had the N64. That was the harmonious relationship in the neighborhood. But when he got Ocarina of Time, I would go over there just to watch it, And we'd have Final Fantasy VII and stuff like that on the PlayStation beforehand. But, a lot of that's cutscenes. The actual action kind of is what it is if you're watching it. But you could just watch somebody play that game. And just the music and the environments. And there are some brief cutscenes and stuff. Well, speaking of which, when you get to the Temple of Time and when you get to that big twist and you emerge as kind of adult Link and the world's changed around you, forever seared in my brain the moment you see that. No idea it's coming.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible presentation, incredible staging. And not only that, it's a visually beautiful moment, but the way it changes everything around you made it feel genuinely impactful.
Well, I mean, the idea that what Nintendo does quite geniusly there is that Hyrule Marketplace is the most bustling area. There's so many NPCs there. And then when you go there 7 years later as an adult Link, it's just full of zombies.
Ain't it always like that when you grow up, though?
Yeah. No, certainly that 9 to 5 full of zombies. And I'm the zombie. And it's such a bittersweet ending, especially when you kind of look into the lore that you can read in the Hyrule Historia about Link and what happened to the Hero of Time version of Link in Twilight Princess.
Selfishly, I think, too, is a perfect time for that game because, pre-internet, there were strategy guides and stuff like that, but it felt like there was so much to discover, and it felt like you got the chance to really discover it on your own terms, and everything felt like the biggest discovery in the world. It's did anybody else know this exists? And the answer is yes, but you didn't have to know that.
Yeah. I might have had the strategy guide.
Listen. You got the big Goron sword, didn't you?
I want to get all 100 gold Skulltulas, man. all 20 heart pieces. But what about you?
I go back and forth. I was actually into this very last minute. I was going to say it's A Link to the Past, which I still think is the definitive Zelda game in some ways, just the way it outlined the structure for so much that followed.
Of course.
Either you are like Link to the Past or you're trying to subvert Link to the Past. But I think it's Wind Waker. And listen, there are parts of Wind Waker that I'm not a huge fan of, although the remaster, remake kind of smooths some of those rough edges. But for me, that was the game that really just awakened just the pure imagination of the Legend of Zelda franchise, made you feel like a kid again, and not just in that sense of, I love Ocarina of Time, that's not a knock against Ocarina of Time, but obviously it's like, okay, in some ways, could we make a 3D Link to the Past work? In some respects. With Wind Waker, I felt like they were like, okay, where can we take this next? How can we go further beyond that? What does the future of a 3D Zelda game look like? And they didn't get it all right all the time. But the idea of exploring that massive world and taking that aspect of Ocarina and building upon it and exploring this massive ocean and all these islands and all these characters and all these incredible dungeons and that unique visual style that was so derided at the time. For me, that's when it really felt like, that's really when Zelda felt at its most magical, where it's like there's aspects of this I know and love, but it's also taking me to places I never thought a game would take me before up until that point, which is for me, what I really want to get from the great Zelda game.
I think Wind Waker clicked for me when you get to the pocket of Hyrule under the waves.
Yes.
And they play the music from like Link to the Past. And you're just like, oh my God, this is where it fits into the mythos. This is, it's just such it's the tragic heart underneath all of the cel-shaded vibrancy at the surface.
Well, I think much like we're doing right now, I think the best Zelda games should remind you of your favorite Zelda games from the past in some way, but they should also just be constantly pushing forward. And I love Twilight Princess and to a lesser degree Skyward Sword, but I feel like of those major 3D Zelda games we got in the post-Wind Waker, post-Ocarina era, I don't think either of them quite captured what what Wind Waker had when it was at its most magical and best, in terms of this fully realized vision that's going to constantly surprise you and also make you fall in love with this series again.
Yeah, it was a game that, for rightfully so, they went back to for Phantom Hourglass and stuff like that. Yeah. And it was interesting seeing how that cel-shaded look flourished on the handhelds while they went a little more realistic with the home console stuff.
And the narrative on that one has changed a bit. It was, of course, kind of hated or divisive at the time. I think it's generally held in a more positive light, but I think if you say it's your favorite, there's still some pushback. But listen, if you haven't had the chance to check it out yet, check out the remake, the remaster. Really allow yourself to, on the Wii U of all things. Listen, it's worth it. Yeah. Check it out however you can. It really is. And just let yourself go with the game. It's a fantastic experience.
Well, Matt, thanks for coming on the show and talking about all things Legend of Zelda.
Absolutely. I was happy to do it. And hey, hopefully you'll have me on next time once we finally get that Majora's Mask remake.
Yeah. The 3D one wasn't enough. Let's go. Let's get
a prayer circle going on, people.
Definitely. Well, thanks again to Matt for coming on the show and talking about all things The Legend of Zelda, and thanks to Razer for helping make this episode possible. Let us know your favorite Legend of Zelda moments in the comments. In the meantime, I'm Sam, this is Power Up, we'll see you guys next time.